Let me ask you something. Think about the last time a child said something so honest, so completely, devastatingly, accidentally honest, that every adult in the room had no choice but to stop what they were doing and just deal with it. Not a lie, not a tantrum, not even a question necessarily, just the truth. The plain, unfiltered, I have not yet learned why we don't say that out loud truth. Children do this. They have always done this. They will always do this. And the rest of us, the adults who have spent decades carefully learning the distance between what we think and what we say, stand there blinking, trying to figure out how to respond to a human being who has not yet acquired the machinery of tact and does not appear to be shopping for it. Now imagine that moment happening on national television, in front of 400 people, with Steve Harvey holding the microphone. On a Thursday afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, a 7-year-old girl named Gracie Beaumont walked to the Family Feud podium in a dress her grandmother had ironed 3 times that morning, carrying a stuffed elephant she had been explicitly told to leave in the green room. She answered a survey question with the kind of confidence that can only come from a person who has not yet been taught to be wrong quietly. What she said took Steve Harvey 11 seconds to process. 11 seconds of live-to-tape television during which Steve Harvey covered his face with both hands, turned completely away from the camera, walked 2 full steps to the left and stood there. Just stood there, his shoulders shaking, the audience screaming, and Gracie Beaumont standing at the podium with her stuffed elephant under her arm, looking around at the adults losing their minds, completely unbothered, waiting for someone to tell her if she had gotten the answer right. She had not gotten the top answer. She had got number 6. She had also got something that does not appear on the board, and that does not come with a point value, but that Steve Harvey would talk about for years after that taping ended, and the stage lights went down, and the audience went home. She had gotten it exactly right. Family Feud tapings in Savannah ran on the particular schedule of a production that has been doing this long enough to know exactly where things go wrong, and has built extra time into every buffer accordingly. Call time was 7:45. Contestants arrived through the side entrance off the parking deck, signed paperwork that nobody read carefully, were sorted by family into green rooms that had been provisioned with fruit platters and bottles of water, and the particular ambient silence of rooms where people are pretending to be calmer than they are. That Thursday in March, a cool morning with a pale sky over the river, the kind of Savannah day that smells like salt water and someone's magnolia hedge 2 streets over, the studio had filled by 9:30. 386 seats occupied. The PTA group from Akron, Ohio, had driven down for a long weekend and commandeered a full row near the aisle with the organizational confidence of people who charter buses regularly. A church group from Mobile, Alabama, occupied the back left section and had arrived in matching T-shirts that said Family Feud Road Trip 2009 on the back, which they had printed themselves and were visibly proud of. The homeschool co-op was in the middle section, 12 children between the ages of 8 and 14, chaperoned by their teacher, a woman in her 50s who had described the trip to parents as educational, which was true, though not in precisely the way she had intended when she wrote the permission slip. The 2 sisters from Worcester, Massachusetts, were in the 3rd row on the left side. They had been trying to get tickets to a taping for 6 years. They treated their corner of the audience like reserved seating at a significant cultural event, which was exactly how they experienced it. It was, in the way of all good Savannah Thursdays in March, a warm and cheerful crowd. Steve Harvey's entrance from the curtain was by this point in the show's run a full event unto itself. The audience began responding the moment the music started before he appeared, in the way concert crowds react to the first chord. He walked out in a burgundy suit with a pocket square the color of a Georgia peach, and he worked the room from the moment his foot hit the stage, pointing at people, asking where they were from, translating their answers into rapid-fire material, making the woman from the PTA group cover her face, making the homeschool co-op kids turn to each other in delight. He was, in this as in most things, a professional. 2 families had been booked for the day. On the left side, the Delacroix family from New Orleans, a mother named Carmen, her husband Felix, their adult son Theo, an aunt named Dolers who had flown in from Baton Rouge specifically for this and was clearly the most competitive person in the building, and Carmen's teenage niece Sophia, who had been brought along to make the 5-person requirement and was playing it cool in the particular way of teenagers who are actually excited but have decided that showing it directly is not the move. On the right side, the Beaumont family from Chattanooga, Tennessee, 5 of them. A father, Raymond, 41, a civil engineer who had the patient, methodical quality of a man who solves structural problems for a living and cannot quite turn that quality off. A mother, Anya, 38, a high school music teacher with 17 years of classroom experience, and the specific kind of calm that comes from having spent those years in rooms full of people who needed something from her. Raymond's mother, Grandma Estelle, 73, in a lavender blazer she had purchased from a department store in downtown Chattanooga for this occasion, and worn with the upright pride of a woman who has decided that this is the kind of thing you dress properly for. And the two youngest, MJ Marcus Jr., 10 years old, with the jittery, productive energy of a boy who has been told to behave and is doing so through heroic personal effort, and Gracie Beaumont, 7 years old. Yellow dress with white eyelet trim, brown eyes that moved fast, a gap between her two front teeth that appeared when she smiled, which was often, and tucked under her left arm with the practiced security of someone who has been carrying the same object for 4 years, Gerald. Gerald was a stuffed elephant, plush gray, approximately the size of a large grapefruit, with one button eye slightly higher than the other from a repair Anya had made when Gracie was 4. He had come with Gracie to the studio despite the clear instructions that personal items were to remain in the green room. The PA who had delivered those instructions had been very kind. Gracie had been very agreeable. Gerald was under her arm when she walked to the podium. Nobody had the heart to send him back. Raymond Beaumont had grown up in Chattanooga's Highland Park neighborhood in a house with a front porch and a backyard that backed up to a chain-link fence and an alley where the neighborhood kids gathered on summer evenings because there was nothing better to do, and that turned out to be one of the best possible reasons to gather. He had been a methodical child. Not shy, not antisocial, not the kind of quiet that worries parents. Methodical in the way that some children are methodical, interested in understanding how things fit together, patient enough to wait for the answer, unwilling to guess when he could know. At 8 years old, he had taken apart his mother's radio to see what was inside it. His mother, who was not a woman who startled easily, had come into the kitchen to find the radio in 17 pieces on the table and Raymond seated in front of it, looking at each piece in turn with the focused attention of a person conducting an inventory. She had asked if he could put it back. He had said yes. He had. The radio worked afterward. His mother had told Grandma Estelle about it, and Grandma Estelle had said, "Well, then," which was the most approval she typically expressed about anything. Raymond had gotten a scholarship to the University of Tennessee, structural engineering, the branch of the discipline concerned with load bearing, with understanding precisely how much weight a thing can carry and where the stress concentrates when the weight exceeds the design parameters. He had found this satisfying in the particular way that methodical people find their work satisfying, not because it was exciting, but because it was honest. Either the structure holds or it doesn't. The math tells you which. He had met Anya in his second year of graduate school at a music recital he attended because a friend had an extra ticket. She had been playing piano, not as a student performer, but as an accompanist for a string quartet, which meant she was sitting slightly off to the side and doing something technically demanding without anyone in the audience quite focusing on her, which was a thing she was accustomed to and had no opinion about either way. Raymond had watched her hands. He had the instinct of an engineer for hands that understood structure. Anya's hands on the keys moved with a quality he later described to her when they knew each other well enough for him to attempt descriptions as architectural. She had looked at him for a long moment and then said, "I think what you mean is that I know where the weight goes." He had said, "Yes, that's exactly what I mean." They had been married 11 years. Anya Beaumont had been teaching music at Harrison High School in Chattanooga for 17 years. She was, by the settled consensus of students past and present, the teacher, not as an honorific, but as a designation, the way a city has a restaurant that people mean when they say the restaurant. If you had passed through Harrison High and you said, "My music teacher," people who went there knew which teacher you meant. What she did that produced this reputation was difficult to quantify, which she appreciated, because things that are difficult to quantify are difficult to replace, and she had a private commitment to being irreplaceable. What she did, essentially, was treat her students as if they were already capable of what she was asking of them. She had discovered in her first year of teaching that the most common reason a student cannot do something is that they have been told, explicitly or by implication, that they probably can't. She had decided to run an experiment. She would remove that implication from her classroom entirely. She would hand students difficult things, difficult pieces, difficult rhythms, difficult concepts, and wait. Not with aggressive optimism, not with cheerleading. Just with the settled expectation of someone who has already decided the outcome and is waiting for the room to catch up. It worked with remarkable consistency. She had brought this quality home, the way teachers inevitably bring their methods home, not always intentionally. MJ, at 10, had the habit of thinking before he answered questions, not to perform thoughtfulness, but because he had grown up in a house where the pause before an answer was a sign of respect for the question. He read above his grade level. He had opinions about architecture, which he had picked up from Raymond, and about music, which he had picked up from Anya, and about the correct way to organize a kitchen, which he had picked up from Grandma Estelle. Gracie had grown up in the same house. She had emerged from it as her own entirely original product. Gracie Beaumont operated, as far as any adult in her orbit had been able to determine after 7 years of close observation, on one central principle. If something was true, it was worth saying. And if something was interesting, it was worth investigating. And if an adult told her something that did not make complete sense, the correct response was to ask a follow-up question, even if the adult seemed to believe the matter was settled. She was not difficult. She was not disruptive. She did not cause scenes or issue complaints. She simply could not be vague. Vagueness to Gracie was like a poorly built wall. It looked like a wall, but if you leaned on it, it didn't hold. She had been in first grade for 7 months. She had already had 3 conferences with her teacher, Mrs. Henley, a woman in her 40s who was a good teacher and who had encountered, in 30 years of teaching, many kinds of children, but who had found Gracie Beaumont a specific and instructive kind of novel. At the October conference, she asked me why the sky looks blue if it's actually space. I explained light scattering. She asked why we don't say that in the weather report then. I did not have an answer for that. At the December conference, she told another student that Santa Claus is parents. I asked her why she said that, and she said, because it's true and Caleb was going to find out anyway. I'm not sure she's wrong, but the timing was difficult. At the February conference, she asked me why we say pass away instead of die when everyone knows what we mean. I explained it was to be gentle with people's feelings. She thought about it and asked if it might confuse the people who don't know yet. I have been thinking about that question for 2 weeks. At all 3 conferences, Raymond and Anya had listened carefully and then said, in the measured tones of parents who have been preparing for these conferences since approximately the first week of first grade, "We understand. We are working on it." They were not technically working on it. They had discussed it. Raymond had said, "Do we want her to stop?" Anya had said, "No, we want her to have better timing." Raymond had said, "Is that teachable?" Anya had thought about it with the expression she gave to genuine pedagogical questions. "I think timing comes with experience," she had said finally. "She's 7, she doesn't have experience yet." "What does she have?" Anya had looked at her daughter, who was in the next room explaining something to Gerald with the focused earnestness of a person conducting a briefing. "She has Gerald," Anya had said, "and she has the truth. We'll work on the timing." Gerald the elephant had been with Gracie since her 3rd birthday, given by Grandma Estelle, who had spotted him in a shop window in downtown Chattanooga and had the specific certainty of grandmothers about the right gift for a specific grandchild. Gerald was plush gray with a red fabric collar and button eyes that had been asymmetric since Anya's repair at age 4. The asymmetry had never been commented on by Gracie, which was, Anya sometimes thought, in the way mothers think about small things that mean large things, the most telling detail she had ever observed about her daughter. Gerald was accepted as he was. That morning in Savannah, Gerald had come to the studio in Gracie's arms, had been present during the paperwork, had occupied the green room with the family, and had been told, along with Gracie, that personal items were to remain in the green room during the taping. Gracie had nodded with great seriousness. Gerald was under her arm when she stepped into the studio. Steve Harvey, during the introductions, had crouched to Gracie's level the way he always did with the youngest contestants, not bending awkwardly from above, but getting down, making it equal. "And who's this?" he had said, gesturing at Gerald. "Gerald," Gracie had said. "Gerald the elephant." "Gerald," she had confirmed. Steve had looked at Gerald's asymmetric eyes. "Gerald," Steve had said formally, "you are very welcome on this stage." Gracie had received this on Gerald's behalf with a single nod. The audience, which had been charmed by Gracie since she walked in, took note of the nod and decided they would follow this child wherever the morning took them. The Beaumonts won the main game in the 2nd round, which was 3 questions faster than anyone who had watched Dollar's Delacroix in warm-up had predicted. Raymond had been the engine of it, 2 head-to-head answers in the 2nd round that landed at number 1 and number 2 on the board, delivered with the flat certainty of a man who has run the calculation and trusts the result. But it was the Gracie moment in the family round that the audience would remember from the main game. She had been standing slightly in front of the family line since the opening buzzer, not breaking formation, technically, but positioned in a way that communicated unambiguous intent to a floor director who had been doing this long enough to read contestant body language. Steve had glanced at Raymond. Raymond had given the nod. The question was, name something you do when you're bored. MJ, from the end of the line, had already called out watch TV before Steve had the microphone down to Gracie's level. Gracie looked at the microphone. She looked at Steve. Talk to Gerald, she said. The audience produced the warm sound of people who have been charmed. Steve made a show of checking the board. Gerald had not been surveyed and said, Survey says Gerald was not one of the 100 people we asked. Gracie looked at the board. She looked at Steve. He should have been, she said. Steve Harvey turned to camera with the expression of a man absorbing something that has no appropriate response. The audience loved this. During the commercial break before Fast Money, Steve made his customary circuit. He spent time with the Delacroix family, Dolers, still competitive in defeat, told Steve 3 things about New Orleans food that he wrote down mentally and would use in an interview 2 months later. He made Sophia laugh by correctly identifying her strategy of appearing uninterested while tracking everything, which she denied, and then admitted. He spent more time at the Beaumont end than the circuit usually required, partly because Grandma Estelle had things to say about Chattanooga that Steve found legitimately interesting. Grandma Estelle was the kind of woman who had been paying attention for 73 years and had arrived at specific opinions about specific things, and Steve Harvey, who shared this quality, recognized it and responded to it. But partly he was watching Gracie. She was not performing. She was not playing to the cameras. She was sitting between MJ and her mother with Gerald in her lap, watching the studio with the clear, unhurried attention of a person who finds everything interesting and has not yet developed the social habit of pretending that some things are not. She always like this? Steve asked Anya, quietly enough. Always, Anya said. Runs in the family? Anya looked at her daughter for a moment. She had the expression of a music teacher considering a question about composition, specifically, the question of how to describe something that has emerged from a process rather than been imposed by one. We tried very hard, she said carefully, to raise children who say what they mean. Steve looked at Gracie. I see that's going well, he said. Anya smiled the smile of a woman for whom this observation is neither new nor disagreeable. During the reset for Fast Money, Steve made a decision. Not a host decision, a human one, the kind you make when you have encountered something and suspect that the right move is to step toward it rather than around it. He was going to let Gracie answer at least one Fast Money question. He had not yet seen the questions on the card. He was not, it turned out, going to need to engineer the situation. Anya Beaumont went first for Fast Money. She answered the way a music teacher answers, with an internal draft that she edited down to the essential word before committing. Each answer arrived with a slight pause that was not hesitation but precision, the pause of someone checking that the note is right before playing it. She scored 147 points in 18 seconds and walked back to the family line with the composed satisfaction of a woman who prepared for a thing, and the thing went the way preparation suggested it would. The Beaumonts needed 53 more points to win $20,000. Raymond stepped to the podium. He looked at Steve Harvey. Can Gracie answer? Not a whim, not a performance. The considered question of a man who has done the structural analysis and decided the design will hold. Steve looked at Gracie. She was already standing slightly forward of the family line, which was her default position relative to things she intended to participate in. Gracie, Steve said. Want to answer some questions for us? She looked at Raymond. Raymond gave the single nod of a father who has run the numbers. Gracie looked back at Steve. Yes, please, she said. She walked to the podium with Gerald. Steve crouched to her level. We need 53 points. Do you know what points are? Like in a game. Exactly. We need the answers to match what the people said when we asked them questions. 100 people were asked, and they wrote down their answers, and what they wrote is on the board. Gracie considered this. What people? 100 different people before the show. Did they know I was going to be answering? Steve Harvey straightened to his full height, looked at 400 audience members, looked back down. They did not know that, no. Okay, Gracie said. She settled Gerald more firmly under her arm. I'll try. The audience went quiet, not the rehearsed quiet of a crowd following a cue. The voluntary quiet of people who have collectively decided that what is about to happen is worth attending to completely. 20 seconds on the clock, the announcer said. Name something you find in a bathroom, Steve said. A toilet. Board lit. Number 3, 18 points. Name something that is always cold. 1 second of thought. Ice cream. Number 2, 22 points. The audience applauded. The total climbed. Name something a dog does when it sees a squirrel. Barks, immediately. Without hesitation, number 1, 34 points. The audience was on its feet. The running total was at 175. They had already won. 2 questions remained. Steve was grinning, the wide, unguarded grin he kept for things that genuinely surprised him, the one that was bigger than the performance version. Name a reason someone might be late for work. Gracie looked at Gerald. She looked at Steve. They couldn't find their keys. Number 4, 11 points. Total 186. They had already cleared the winning threshold. The audience knew. Steve knew. He was going to ask the last question anyway. He was going to ask it because this was Gracie Beaumont and Gerald, and the morning had earned its ending, and because certain moments, once they have begun, generate their own obligation to see themselves through. He looked at the last question on the card. He looked at Gracie. Later, Steve would say that in the moment between reading the card and asking the question, he had understood, with the specific clarity of a man who has been reading rooms his entire professional life, what was about to happen. He would say this in dressing rooms and in interviews and over dinner and to his opening act late at night, and he would say it the same way every time. I knew. I looked at that question and I looked at this 7-year-old girl and I knew, and I asked it anyway. Because I had to know if I was right. He was right. Name something that embarrasses adults. Beat 6, midpoint complication. Gracie Beaumont did not hesitate. She did not consult Gerald. She did not look at her parents. She did not perform the 3-second pause that adults perform when they are privately selecting the safe answer from the range of answers their brain has produced. She answered with the clean velocity of a person who has been asked a factual question about a subject she has direct personal experience with. When they toot in public. The studio did not react immediately. There was a gap. Approximately 1.5 seconds during which 430 people in that room processed what they had just heard, confirmed it against what they thought they had heard, verified the two were the same, and then, as a single organism, abandoned composure entirely. The audience erupted, not politely, not in the managed, appropriate way of daytime television audiences who understand they are being recorded, in the full, uncontrollable release valve laughter of people who have been ambushed by something and have no mechanism remaining to contain the response. The woman from the Akron PTA was gripping the arm of the woman beside her. 2 members of the Mobile church group were leaning on each other. The homeschool teacher had both hands over her face. The sisters from Worcester, Massachusetts, who had waited 6 years for this taping, were holding each other. M.J. Beaumont had both arms over the railing and his face buried in them. Steve Harvey covered his face. Both hands, complete coverage. He turned away from the camera and took 2 full steps to the left, and he stood there, his shoulders shaking. The microphone in his hand, pointed at the floor, picked up the sound of Steve Harvey trying with the full effort of a professional with decades of experience to get himself together, and failing at a level that was itself a spectacle. The floor director had stopped doing anything. The segment producer in the booth had leaned back in her chair. Gracie stood at the podium. She looked at the audience. She had not previously observed adults in this particular condition, and she was finding it interesting. She looked at the board, which had not yet revealed whether her answer was on it. She looked at Gerald. She looked at Steve Harvey, who still had his face in his hands. "Did I get it right?" she asked. Steve Harvey made a sound. It was not a word. The audience heard it and laughed harder, which had not seemed physically possible. At the end of the family line, Raymond Beaumont had both palms flat on his thighs and was looking directly at the ceiling. His mouth was a controlled line. His eyes were very bright. A civil engineer who spends his professional life calculating the load at which things break had recognized, in real time, the precise moment at which his own structural integrity had become a matter of active management. Anya had turned away from the stage entirely. She had made the maternal calculation that Gracie, who was still at the podium waiting for an answer, should not see her mother incapacitated by laughter while she was still trying to conduct the business of the question. Grandma Estelle was laughing completely and without apology, in the full-throated way of a 73-year-old woman who has earned the right to find things funny without moderating it for the comfort of others. Gracie waited. She had a well-developed capacity for waiting, built over 7 years of being in situations where adults needed time to arrive at where she already was. She repositioned Gerald. She waited. Steve Harvey collected himself. It took 43 seconds. This was documented because someone in post-production timed the raw tape. 43 seconds from the moment Steve covered his face to the moment he turned back to the podium. During those 43 seconds, the audience sustained its laughter without prompting of any kind, running on pure stored energy, on the absolute unexpectedness of what had just happened. He turned back. His eyes were wet in the specific way of a person who has laughed beyond the body's usual capacity for it. His cheeks were high. His expression was the expression of a man who has experienced something and is still, several seconds later, inside the experience. He looked at Gracie. Gracie looked at him. She was still waiting. "I have been doing this show," Steve said. He stopped. He tried again. "In all the time I have been standing on this stage," he stopped again. He looked at the audience. The audience, which had been watching Steve try to form a sentence, laughed warmly with him, with the affection of a crowd that has watched a man they like fail at something and wants him to know they appreciate the failure. Steve pointed at Gracie. "This girl." He shook his head. "Gracie, can I ask you something?" "Yes," Gracie said. "Where did that answer come from?" Gracie looked at him with the patient expression of someone explaining something that is self-evident. "That's what embarrasses my dad," she said. The audience went again. Raymond had regained a degree of composure during the 43 seconds. He lost it again immediately and returned to the ceiling-looking position, which had become, over the course of the morning, his primary defensive formation. Steve looked at Raymond. "Raymond, is that true?" Raymond could not answer verbally. He made a gesture. It communicated everything necessary. "Raymond," Steve said, "your daughter has just informed 400 people and this camera," he indicated the camera closest to him, "of your personal situation." From the podium, Gracie observed her father. "Daddy, it embarrasses you," she said helpfully. "I answered the question about what embarrasses adults. That's what the question was." Raymond opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Anya, who was facing away from the stage and whose shoulders were moving in a way that indicated she was not going to be available for assistance. "She's right," Raymond said. Steve Harvey pointed at Raymond. He said, "She's right. Raymond, the engineer, says the 7-year-old is right." The audience was completely gone. Steve turned back to Gracie with the gravity of a man performing an official duty. "Gracie, it is my honor to check this board." He turned to the board with the full weight of the pause. The audience quieted in the specific way that audiences quiet before a reveal, not silence, but the reduced, anticipatory hush of people waiting to see how something resolves. "Survey says," the board revealed, "number 6. 7 points, not the top answer, not number 1. Number 6 with 7 points. 7 adults out of 100 surveyed had been asked what embarrasses adults and had said some version of passing gas in public. 7 people sitting across from a person with a clipboard had been asked a question and had given the answer that 93 others had thought and then decided not to give. And a 7-year-old girl from Chattanooga with a stuffed elephant had given the same answer without pausing to decide. The audience understood all of this simultaneously. The response was complete. Steve crouched to Gracie's level. He was grinning the full grin, the real one, with his whole face in it. "Gracie, you got it." "I know," Gracie said. "She said it the way you say something you were not worried about." Steve looked at her for a long moment, then he looked at Gerald. "Can I hold Gerald for a second?" Gracie considered this. "For a second," she said. Steve Harvey, host of Family Feud, took Gerald the asymmetric-eyed stuffed elephant, held him at arm's length for the audience to see, and said, "Gerald, your person is the best contestant I have ever had on this stage." He handed Gerald back. Gracie received him with the appropriate dignity. "Thank you," she said on Gerald's behalf. The total was confirmed, 193 points. The Beaumont family had won $20,000. Anya turned back around. She covered her mouth, then uncovered it, then covered it again. Raymond had his arm around Grandma Estelle, who was clapping with the complete satisfaction of a 73-year-old woman who drove 3 hours in a lavender blazer and received exactly what the occasion promised. MJ was jumping. Grandma Estelle, even while being hugged by her son, maintained enough composure to clap steadily, which was a thing she could do because she had been expecting this outcome since approximately the green room. Gracie was still at the podium. She was looking at the board, specifically at the number 6 position and the 7 points. She appeared to be verifying the arithmetic. She moved when she had finished verifying it, and not before. During the congratulatory movement of people and cameras and production staff reconfiguring for the close, Steve found himself near Gracie, who had been settled at the edge of the family group, and was watching the celebration with the calm attention of someone who has participated in an event and is now observing its secondary effects. He crouched beside her. "Gracie." She turned her full attention to him. She had the quality of giving her full attention to things without any part of it being performative, which was not a common quality and which Steve Harvey recognized as valuable because he shared it in a professional capacity and had spent years developing it, and she appeared to have been born with it. "Can I tell you something?" "Yes." "When you grow up," Steve said, "do not let anyone teach you to say things you don't mean." Gracie thought about this. "Why would I say things I don't mean?" People learn to, adults do it constantly. They learn that the safe answer is better than the true answer. They learn to pick the thing that won't make people uncomfortable instead of the thing that's actually right. Gracie considered this with the expression she reserved for explanations that were complete but left out something important. That doesn't sound very useful, she said. Steve Harvey sat with this for a moment. No, he said. It is not very useful at all. He stood back up and addressed the audience. I want to explain what happened here, Steve said, because I want everyone in this room to understand what this 7-year-old just did. He gestured at the board where Gracie's answer sat at number 6. 100 people were surveyed. They sat across from someone with a clipboard and were asked, name something that embarrasses adults. 100 people thought about it. He paused. 93 of them decided on a different answer. He let that sit. Now, why did 93 people pick something else? Was it because they didn't think of what Gracie said? No, every single one of those 100 people thought of it first, before anything else, because it's the true answer, it's the honest answer. Everybody knows it. He walked a few steps. But 93 of them made the same decision. They decided that is the true thing, but this is a survey and there are people listening and I will give the appropriate answer instead. He stopped. 7 people said the true thing, 7, and a 7-year-old girl who has not yet been given sufficient reason to say the appropriate thing instead of the true thing walked up here with her elephant and answered honestly. And she was right. She got it. Number 6, 7 points. She got it. The audience was quiet in the way audiences go quiet when they are thinking about something rather than reacting to it. I'm not going to tell you what the lesson is, Steve said. I think you can find it, but I will say this. I have been doing this for a while. People have surprised me. People have been funny and moving and shocking on this stage. He looked at Gracie, who was now settled against Anya's side with Gerald held in the correct 2-armed position. But today I was reminded that the most useful thing a person can be in a room full of questions is honest, without checking first to see if the honest answer is convenient. He looked at Raymond, who had both hands in his pockets and the expression of a man who has come to a complete understanding of his situation. Raymond, you are a good man. Raymond nodded with feeling. Your daughter is going to make things difficult for unprepared people for the rest of her life, Steve said. And that is one of the highest compliments I know how to give. Raymond looked at Anya. Anya looked at Raymond. The look of 2 people who have been receiving this assessment in various forms for 7 years and have arrived at equanimity on the subject. From the end of the line, Grandma Estelle said, We know, fully, without qualification. Steve Harvey pointed at Grandma Estelle. And Grandma Knows. The audience came back to full energy and released it entirely, all at once, in the direction of a 73-year-old woman in a lavender blazer who received it the way she received everything, as her due. The clip went online 2 days after the episode aired. Not from the network's official account, though the network's official account posted it within 48 hours of realizing what had happened. From a woman in the 7th row of the studio audience who had recorded it on her phone and uploaded it that evening with the caption, No one will ever top this little girl. I promise you. The clip was 47 seconds long, beginning with Gracie's answer and ending with Steve Harvey turning back to face the stage after his 43 seconds of recovery, eyes bright, grinning, still shaking his head slightly. By the end of the first week, the clip had been shared 280,000 times. By the end of the first month, the number was past 2 million and climbing. What happened in the comment sections across every platform that hosted the clip was, in its own way, as interesting as the clip itself. There were 2 dominant categories of response. The first was predictable. Variations on I have watched this 40 times and I will keep watching it. On this child is the funniest human being television has produced. On the image of Steve Harvey's shaking shoulders from behind. That category was vast and consistent and warm. The second category was smaller and stranger and more specific. It was the category of people who watched the clip and sat for a moment, and then wrote something they had not entirely planned to write. A father in Macon, Georgia wrote, My daughter is 6, and she does this exact thing every day, and I spend half my time trying not to laugh and the other half wondering how to let her keep it forever. A mother in Spokane, Washington wrote, My son was like this until he was around 10, and then something changed, and I have never been able to name exactly what changed, and watching this just made me realize I am still a little sad about it. A man in El Paso, Texas wrote simply, I used to be her. I remember. A retired kindergarten teacher in Tucson, Arizona wrote a longer comment, long enough that several hundred people replied to it. She wrote, Every child I taught arrived on the first day of school still saying exactly what they meant. The job, whether you intend it to be or not, is to teach them to edit themselves. You teach them that the right answer and the appropriate answer are not always the same thing, and you teach them to choose the appropriate one. I was a good teacher. I am no longer certain that is the compliment I used to think it was. The comment received 12,000 replies over several months. Gracie Beaumont found out about the clip several weeks after it was posted. A classmate at school told her. She received the information with interest and no particular agitation. The concept that a large number of people had watched her answer a question and found it funny was interesting to her in an abstract way. The question of why it was funny took her a little longer. When Anya explained that people were watching it because she had said the true thing without being embarrassed by it, Gracie had thought about this for a moment. "Why would I be embarrassed?" she had said. "It was the right answer." Anya had held her daughter. She had held her the way you hold children who are still entirely themselves, aware of the fact of it, aware that it is temporary in a way that nothing prepares you for, aware that the best possible version of your job is to let it last as long as it can. Gerald had been in the way. Anya held her daughter around him. Raymond had watched from the kitchen doorway. He had said nothing because he understood that some structures are better observed than touched. The $20,000 went into an account Raymond and Anya had opened the year before, half into college funds divided between MJ and Gracie. A portion to Grandma Estelle, given without discussion, because Grandma Estelle had driven 3 hours in a lavender blazer, and that deserved acknowledgement. The remainder into a family fund with no destination specified and no hurry to specify one. Grandma Estelle used her portion to replace the winter coat she had been wearing for 9 years. She bought it from the same department store in downtown Chattanooga where she had bought the lavender blazer. She bought it without apology. Gerald is still with Gracie, still asymmetric, still correct. Steve Harvey told this story for years. He told it on other shows, in green rooms, in the kind of conversation that happens late in an evening when people have moved past small talk and into the territory of things that actually stayed with them. He always told it the same way, and he always ended it the same way. 100 people were asked what embarrasses adults, he would say. 93 of them gave the appropriate answer. 7 gave the true one. And a 7-year-old girl walked up to my podium with a stuffed elephant and gave the true answer without stopping to check if it was appropriate, and she was right, and she got the points. And she stood there waiting for me to recover for 43 seconds without being bothered by any of it. Pause. And what I keep coming back to is this: she was not brave. She didn't need courage to say it. She just said it, because she hadn't learned yet that the true thing and the appropriate thing were supposed to be different. Another pause. We all knew that. The 93 people on that survey knew it. I knew it. Every adult in that studio knew it, and we all would have given a different answer, because somewhere along the way we learned to. He would look at whoever he was talking to. That's the whole story. That's what I covered my face for. There are moments on a stage that do not stay on the stage. A little girl walked up to a podium in Savannah, Georgia, with her elephant under her arm and answered a question the way she answered every question, directly, specifically, and without looking around first to see if it was safe. She was right. She waited for the adults to finish reacting. Then she asked if Steve Harvey would like to hold Gerald for a second. He said yes. That is the story. That is entirely enough. If Gracie made you smile today, and if something about her reminds you of a child you know, or a version of yourself from before you learned to edit, stay with this channel. Every week we bring you the moments from this stage that almost didn't make it to air. Subscribe, and don't miss what's coming next.